This video is sponsored by Film Convert.
Some of it is very black, and you just gotta laugh at it and you gotta joke about it.
Are we safe in the first world from infectious diseases? Certainly not.
There's no infection, it's just people killing people.
I feel like I'm not doing the right thing anymore.
This is the way we record our lives. We are surrounded by cameras. They're everywhere.
In the 1980s, they were in his films. In the 90s, they were in his games. A certain teenager kept seeing one of the most common monsters in fiction: zombies. And that teenager decided to dip his toes into writing. He was influenced by comic books, but as a one-man band. He didn't find himself attached to being the artist or the colorist. He wanted to focus on putting pen to paper. So he pivoted to novels, and then he found himself revisiting this classic monster. And he wondered, what could be done to make them truly terrifying? And in doing so, he envisioned an apocalypse that would catapult him toward success. That writer was Alex Garland.
I started out long time, like 30 years ago as a novelist.
I was just struggling trying to figure out how to write a book. I was picking books off the shelves going, oh right, that's how you do dialogue.
So I think lots of writers practice writing or know they want to become writers or something like that as they're teenagers. That was not me at all. What I liked doing was drawing.
Was the fact that your father a cartoonist affect your decision to do art or no?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Because I could draw, he taught me how to draw. I wanted to be like a comic book artist or an illustrator or something like that. I suddenly realized that, just for me personally, the work-product ratio was completely wrong here. I love comic books, so I'm not being disparaging, but just for me it didn't work.
My whole career has been unexpected and surprising to me. I was a backpacker. My whole life sort of revolved around backpacking for many years, really.
I wrote a book about backpacking and then suddenly I had a job. I was a novelist. I didn't want to be a novelist. It had happened very accidentally.
Garland's first break into film came with the adaptation of his first novel, The Beach, directed by Danny Boyle. Garland wasn't directly involved in the production, with his story being adapted by writer John Hodge instead. But he said that he observed from a distance what the filmmaking process was like and could see that the group of guys had a setup. They were a triangle, a writer, director, and producer team. Having until that point worked on his own creatively, he was inspired by that three-way collaboration. He wanted to be the writer in that setup.
I had a deal for 2 more books, which was really based on the fact that the first book had sold well. And I spoke to my wife and said, this isn't for me. Are you cool with us taking a risk? And she said, yeah. And I paid the money back to the publishers, which they were very surprised about, I remember. Not as surprised as my agent at the time, who was mortified. That's really furious with me.
So he reached out to producer Andrew McDonald, then to Danny Boyle, and pitched a horror film.
And I knew nothing about script writing at that point. And to my surprise, Danny said, yeah, I would like to direct it.
Alex, the writer, was a mad zombie fan. He knew everything about the zombie genre, and I didn't. So I kind of kept a distance from it.
Now, zombie movies, of course, were a dime a dozen, but this one would have one very noteworthy, very scary shift. The zombies could run.
I pitched an idea which was about running zombies in London. That was it. In fact, that was the pitch. It was running zombies in London. There wasn't a story beyond it. And I then went off and wrote that as a spec script.
Garland's interest in zombies had come from the game Resident Evil, where they made up one of the most common generic monsters. But what he noticed was that the zombies themselves weren't very intimidating. As in most mediums, they're slow. They shuffle along fairly mindlessly, and their flesh is rotting away, so they're weak, meaning they're not usually much of a threat. Resident Evil made them intimidating by its somewhat awkward tank controls that made it harder to get around, and with resource management, a slow shuffling zombie Wasn't really that scary if you could blow its head off with a shotgun. But when you run out of shells, that's another story. But still, the point is that the zombies themselves weren't very intimidating. The game had to throw other wrenches in the works to change that, and that's what most mediums do. If it's a film, maybe your characters have those same resource problems, or maybe a car just breaks down in the middle of the road so you don't have an easy getaway. Or maybe, as many horror films rely on, the characters are just stupid.
She's mesmerized.
What Garland came up with was something very different. These zombies aren't actually undead. They're people, but their minds are completely warped by rage. The rage virus was inspired primarily by rabies. In animals, rabies manifests itself in two forms. Dumb rabies, which can make the animal weak, and furious rabies, which can make them hyperactive and violent. Rabies can be transmitted to humans, of course, mostly through bites and scratches, and although it can be prevented with vaccines, if you leave it until symptoms start to show, which can take between a few days to several years, you're almost certainly dead. But humans, thankfully, only exhibit symptoms similar to dumb rabies: numbness, struggling to breathe. There is an energetic symptom too, but not that urge towards violence. So Garland's virus essentially asks what happens if humans could get furious rabies, if they could become rabid in need of putting down. It then goes further. Rather than rage being a major escalation, it becomes all the person is capable of. Even the most basic instincts for anything other than violence go out the window, and transmission is far easier. Any fluids from the infected, even the tiniest drop of blood, can do it. And vaccines? Forget it.
Oh my God, I love zombies. I'd forgotten about them. Yeah. I love them. I don't know why I love them. What's special about them, but I just love them.
Given the lack of supernatural elements and the very different nature of our zombies, the trio didn't even consider the film a zombie flick at all, with Boyle arguing that you can't make a zombie movie today, comparing it to the nuclear panic of the Cold War. Nuclear weapons are still here, but that paranoia is not the same, he said. And so they created the story of Jim, a man who wakes up after an accident to find the normally bustling London empty, and quickly finds out why. Originally, Jim was meant to be English, but instead the role went to Irish Cillian Murphy. Despite him putting on a poor attempt at sounding like a Londoner, Boyle was impressed by him and kept giving him more rounds of auditioning.
So we found this guy, Jim. We found Cillian Murphy, this Irish actor, and this girl, Naomi Harris, to play Selena. And it's easy to find inexperienced actors who haven't got much track record, but of course the danger is that they won't be able to carry the film.
Once he was cast, Boyle encouraged him to drop the dodgy accent and just play Jim as an Irishman. It's hard to imagine it now, but at the time Murphy was pretty much a no-name, having only starred in other indie projects. But this was something Boyle actually preferred, as he felt that having most of the cast be obscure actors made things more believable.
In terms of walking through London, I think that is a really good example of then what a director does do. Because in the script, I think that was like 4 lines or something. It said, Jim walks through empty London.
And from here, the story experienced one major shift from the end product we know. For context, spoilers if you haven't already watched it. But let's be fair, this film's already been out for 20 years. You've had your chance. The film's story follows Jim meeting 2 other survivors, Selena and Mark, with Mark being quickly killed off. Working through London, they then find 2 more, Frank and his daughter Hannah, before traveling up to the northern city of Manchester to find a blockade where a military broadcast promises a cure. They make it to the blockade, but find it deserted. The military left and are probably dead, and Frank gets himself infected. Originally, the story saw Jim resist Selena's urges to kill him before it's too late and tie Frank down instead, taking a small cache of supplies and working their way into a research facility behind the blockade. A lone survivor with knowledge of the cure barricaded himself in and refused to tell the others his name or help them, leaving them to die. Jim tells this survivor, who he decides to call James, his whole life story to try and convince him to humanize him and help. But nothing works until he introduces James to Hannah, where he finally agrees, but tells Jim there's a catch. All of Frank's blood needs to be replaced with someone else's that's uninfected, a full transfusion. Jim agrees to do it. They hold off a zombie attack and perform the procedure, and Frank is cured. Jim, having made his sacrifice, has become infected and is sealed off and left to die by this new trio. This was the original path the plot took, but it was felt to be implausible. So instead, while Jim hesitates at the blockade, the military reveals themselves from hiding, kill Frank, and take the other three to their base, bringing the film to its actual branch where Jim and the survivors have to survive both the infected and the sadism of the abusive soldiers. Production would begin for 28 Days Later on September 1st, 2001, quickly filming all over the UK with their 9-week schedule. Interestingly enough, though, they had begun shooting earlier in the year for 4 days in July for a scene where they would have to completely shut down London streets. But before we get to this fascinating aspect of the production in London, it's critical to discuss the cinematographer of this film and his heavy influence. What you're seeing here is the 1998 film Festin, now renamed to The Celebration. I'm sure you can see some of the similarities between this and 28 Days Later. That's because cinematographer Anthony Dod Mantle was doing something groundbreaking with this 1998 film, pioneering the use of home-quality digital video for a feature film. And it's something that Danny Boyle saw and immediately was interested in bringing him on to help in 28 Days Later.
I'd previously worked on celluloid only, really, and been thrilled, to arrive at the holy grail of celluloid.
I remember seeing Festin, which Anthony Dod Mantle shot, and loving the camera operating. There wasn't much lighting, but it made you focus on the choice of how you use the camera and how you move it.
So I got in touch with the guy who shot it, Anthony Dod Mantle. And I said, I feel like I'm not doing the right thing anymore. Can we do something together, digitally?
So Boyle would fly to meet Mantle while he was on set for the film All About Love in Sweden, and the discussion was anything but normal. Danny was displaying these pretty horrific pictures of violence on a table in front of me and saying, "This film is, of course, quite violent." This was a meeting that fundamentally changed the careers of both directors and the cinematographer for what they would accomplish with 28 Days Later, setting them both up for long, successful careers, with Dod Mantle going on to film movies like Antichrist, 127 Hours, In the Heart of the Sea, and, of course, Slumdog Millionaire.
But I remember Anthony saying to me, it's all very well working in this format, but he said, I'll never get an Oscar.
And the Oscar goes to Anthony Dod Mantle for Slumdog Millionaire.
But what was it that he brought to the table for this film? Well, 28 Days Later is not really a normal film, actually. It isn't film, but rather was shot digitally on a prosumer Canon Xl1 digital camera, an aspect Mantle clearly brought to the table from his other films. The film was acquired using magnetic tape, specifically on mini DV cassettes. This was quite the choice at this period of time, as even George Lucas was still really in the works of using the Sony HDW F900 cinema camera for pieces of Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace back in 1999. So no one was really using digital cameras in films widely at this point. Celluloid, of course, was the standard back in the day for a reason, but digital cinema cameras were nowhere close to recreating the look and feel of a film at this time period, which is something that Dod Mantle noted when they were filming in an abandoned London, that if I had shot those on a big negative, it would have looked absolutely stunning. But stunning as it might have been, it wouldn't have been suited to the story that they were trying to tell. I saw an artistic logical justification for shooting this film on this format because it was a very violent script. Very disturbing, gritty, and anarchic. But there was a far more practical reason for using digital cameras for this film as well, especially for the London shots. There were a lot of location work and a lot of building on location, and that's expensive in London. We knew that if we shot on 35mm stock in a conventional format, we would probably have to lose quite a few scenes. But not everyone was a fan of the decision to go digital. And we have an exclusive interview with that person for this video. Today we are joined by Zombie Extra 82 from the film 28 Days Later. Tell us, why did these digital cameras traumatize you?
I put a lot of work into this character, even getting Bit to become a real zombie for the role. I'm a method actor, you see, but when I signed up, we were promised we would be shot on film. With that beautiful film grain, it really makes my skin come out. On digital, I look ugly and small children are scared of me.
We feel for you, and we actually have prepared a surprise for you as well. Thanks to our sponsor, Film Convert, you can transform all of that ugly digital footage that you hate so much to look like film. See for yourself. And if you've seen a Frame Voyager video, you've seen what Film Convert can do. We use it as a base in so many of our custom effects and presets we've built over the years. I'm excited anytime I get to talk about them because their film emulation and halation software are so much fun to use, and it's a great tool to have for any editor. Check out the link below in the description for 10% off either Film Convert Nitrate or Cinematch, their software that allows you to color match different camera footage. Be sure to check out that link below. Now, how does one just shut down the street of London for one of the more memorable moments of the film? Well, getting up early in the morning before traffic got too crazy to hold back. Producer Andrew McDonald recalled this saying, "We were able to shoot for an hour or so before the city got too busy for us to hold back the traffic. It was very exciting, and when you see the whole of Westminster Bridge and the embankment all closed for you, and the traffic stopped, and you can't hear anything, it was thrilling but strange as well." Director Danny Boyle had first envisioned this scene based on old photographs he had found from war-torn countries over the past 20 years prior to making the film, and it really achieved the striking goal of making familiar locations look uncomfortably empty, especially at a time before we had all the visuals from COVID. But it was not easy to pull off, especially one scene of a taxi driving alone on an open highway. The crew, of course, got permission to film this scene and had the police help slowly stop traffic both ways. The only problem was that they only had a minute to film the sequence, so they would utilize 10 cameras at once to capture as much footage as they could of this taxi driving down the road by itself.
And we would not have been able to achieve the film on film because we had to stop traffic. We didn't have the money to do it. So what we would do is we'd just hold the traffic briefly. But because we were on these cameras, we could use 10 of them because they're so cheap. And he could walk through central London, an area of it, and we had 10 cameras on it. So you'd only have to stop the traffic for a few minutes and then you would actually have 10 shots.
It was a technical nightmare, but a fantastically weird scene, said Boyle. It makes you feel that the whole of Britain has been abandoned.
One of the problems with emptying London now is that, I think probably before dance music, you could have probably done it. But now, because of dance culture, of course, which has opened clubs, people are piling out of the clubs at dawn, and they overlap with all the kind of people arriving to clean the offices.
Another difficult scene to film, of course, was the Westminster Bridge scene. The art department for the bridge scene went all out with the trash and debris everywhere along the bridge. Unfortunately, one government employee thought it was all trash that needed to be picked up. I ran onto the bridge with everyone really tense because the clock's ticking, and I said, "Look, excuse me, we're filming. Don't worry, that isn't rubbish. It will be cleared up." And he just wouldn't believe me. I started thinking I was going to have to throw him off the bridge.
This is the way we record our lives. We are surrounded in this city by cameras. They're everywhere, and they're all these DV cameras, all types of them, and they're recording our every motion all the time.
It definitely suits the story.
For the actors on the streets of London, they needed to be aware of where multiple Canon Xl1s were located, as simultaneous shooting was commonplace in the 15-minute or so window of time that freed up in the city. In one swoop, the team didn't just have one shot in the can, but 6, making the production of 28 Days Later especially resourceful.
A few occasions, you might just go, and there's a camera there, so you have to be aware of it all the time, but it's great because you can get so many different perspectives and you can do things that you can't do with big 35mm cameras.
You can't just sort of wait for your single or for your close-up shot.
When you do it for real, things happen, actors are different and it changes everything because suddenly it's there for the actors. They don't have to imagine that the traffic will be removed or that the dinosaur will be there. It actually is there for them.
And sometimes they had to be resourceful with elements outside of their control, like birds. That famous scene with Cillian coming to the car and the alarm going off under center point. That was between 8 and 9 in the morning, and there were commuters howling the most obscene words. We were told off like little schoolboys by the authorities in Whitehall. I remember the conversation. What do we do about the birds? Well, we just decided that the virus didn't kill them. And the director and the production crew had a bit of luck in the fact that they got these shots early on. Though definitely not luck that they would say was good in any sense of the word. Because even though they likely would never have gotten these shots if they filmed them, this also coincided with the tragedy of 9/11. We filmed the beginning of pre-9/11, and we wouldn't have been able to film it post-9/11 because we had a freedom in London that was just ridiculous when you look back on it now. We were able to tow in and turn over buses outside Downing Street. Now they'd be around you with machine guns. So with that, their early production filming came to a close. But looking back on the success of this film, this was a crucial aspect to really making this world come alive. and selling it to the audience. Though many times throughout this process, cinematographer Mantle was very concerned about how the footage would turn out. As I watched the morning light come over the St. Paul's Cathedral with all of these beautiful violets, yellows, and magentas, I thought, how much of this information am I going to be able to maintain on the final print for a massive throw in a big cinema house in London or the States? And it was a legitimate concern, as processing digital over to film for the release was difficult to achieve consistency across all theaters and their varying conditions, of course. In the best conditions, they would be fine, but in the worst of conditions, they needed to make sure that the audience could actually still see what was happening. Thankfully, they figured out how to film both day and night sequences in a way that you could still see what was going on. Though Mantle hadn't thought about the night sequences and how they would light them until Danny Boyle mentioned to him that, "I forgot to tell you, because the society has fallen apart, the electricity is all gone." That slowly sunk in, Mantle said, and after about 3 days, I realized I was in hell. Another filmmaking technique 28 Days Later enjoys quite a lot is high shutter speed filming.
The one that really got me was the rain, because rain is really makes things so difficult, because by the time you got the rain right and the light right and the angle so you could see the rain and then trying to do the shot, that was very difficult.
With a high shutter speed, the movie gains two interesting attributes. For one, the image becomes sharper as the CCD sensor of the Canon Xl1 isn't exposed for that long, reducing the motion blur, and that in turn made the images jerkier, making the individual frames stand out much more. Especially for establishing an atmosphere, this high shutter speed filming was effective, accentuating individual rain droplets and making action sequences appear more frantic and dangerous. But just as they were finally getting close to wrapping up this film, they ran into another issue: running out of money. And at this point, they essentially had to pack up and leave without filming an ending. This led to multiple variations on how it would end, from a hospital where Jim would die and the two girls setting off into the world on their own, and the other was all of them potentially getting rescued when a jet would fly over and see their giant letters on the side of a hill. The first variation, of course, did not test well. It, in fact, tested so poorly that the studio gave them extra money for the other ending. And even with that funding, it would not be enough to work in a CGI jet flying overhead. So they instead found someone that would do a few flyovers in the area to give them the shots that they needed. Production would wrap up and they would head into post-production. They would end up showing the happier ending, of course, to the US audiences, but would end up including 3 alternative endings in the DVD extras. But despite having some issues there at the end with the ending and the budget, this film would go on to be a massive success at the box office, raking in $85.7 million worldwide, setting up the big question of, will they make a sequel? And you can check out the story of the production of 28 Weeks Later right here.